images of dragons are rampant throughout the Forbidden City, appearing high overhead and underfoot, on roofs, ceilings, walls, and pavements, on thrones, furniture, and carpets, even on the emperor's dishes and clothes. The emperor's dragons are special. Unlike the other dragons in China, the emperor's dragons have 5 claws. The dragons are revered as bringers of rain, vitally important in an agricultural country, and for people living in buildings prone to lightning strikes. Unlike the malevolent dragons of Western mythology, Chinese dragons can be playful and benevolent. They don't breathe fire, but spout water. They're often depicted frolicking in the clouds or in the waves. In front of the Hall of Preserving Harmony is one of the marvels of the Forbidden City. It is carved from a single block of stone. No one ever walked on this heavily sculpted ceremonial stairway, and only the emperor in his palanquin was carried over it. It took enormous skill to hew the huge stone slab out of the earth, but that was the easy part. Moving it to Beijing was the real challenge. The architects were master builders, but moving a 300-ton slab, about the same weight as 250 automobiles, required more than brute strength. It required imagination. And ice. Lots and lots of ice. 50 kilometers of ice. In 1420, there was no vehicle big enough or strong enough to carry the stone slab, and it was so heavy that rollers put under it would just sink into the ground. So the engineers came up with an ingenious solution. They moved the slab in the dead of winter, and not just over a frozen ground, but on a sheet of ice. Every half-kilometer they dug a well and spread the water on the road. Then 20,000 men and horses dragged the slab over the ice. Even so, it took them 28 days to make the 50-kilometer journey from the quarry to Beijing. In 1679, disaster struck the Hall of Supreme Harmony for a 3rd time. But on this occasion, it was not an act of God, but the hand of man that brought the building down. Twice before, the hall had been struck by lightning and burned to a cinder. But this time it was not fate, but careless kitchen eunuchs who ignited the blaze. Nothing could quell the raging inferno. The 6 eunuchs who caused the fire paid with their heads. On the previous occasions when the palace burned down, it was relatively easy to rebuild it. All it required was the political will and a source of Namu timber. This time it was harder. "80 years had passed since the previous fire. It was such a long time that there was no one who remembered how to make the puzzle-like brackets that locked the beams in place. The palace archive was scoured. Even the emperor tried to solve the puzzle. But the secret of how to build the complicated structure had been truly lost. In the end, a commoner provided the solution. He was an old man, already in his 70s. For more than 40 years, he had labored in the construction department of the Forbidden City. He made a model of the hall that revealed the secrets of the interlocking brackets. When that model was scaled up, there was surprise and delight that it worked perfectly. The Hall of Supreme Harmony would burn down twice more in its long history, a victim of being the tallest building in the age before lightning conductors. Each time it was burned down, it was rebuilt. Lesser buildings could be replaced, and over the years, new buildings infilled the back courts of the Forbidden City. But the Hall of Supreme Harmony was always rebuilt on the same spot. It was a constant presence in the life of the palace. Also constantly present were the palace eunuchs. They were the largest group in the Forbidden City. They kept the place running. Eunuchs are not born. They are made. But who would ever volunteer to be a eunuch? The Forbidden City was frequently swamped with eunuchs. They did the brunt of the palace work. From cooks and cleaners to laundrymen, bearers, and guards of emperor's women, eunuchs were everywhere in the palace. Except for the emperor himself, they were the only men allowed to live in the inner court. Until the 15th century, many eunuchs were prisoners of war who were forcibly castrated. Adult male captives were executed. Captive boys were castrated. Both the scrotum and the penis were removed. If the boy survived the operation, he could become a palace servant. Some upwardly mobile boys volunteered for castration, or were volunteered by their penniless parents. As one eunuch has said,
"It seemed a little thing to give up one pleasure for so many. By suffering that small change, I could be sure of an easy life in surroundings of beauty and magnificence."
So many boys volunteered that the palace became awash with eunuchs. There were even laws to limit the number of eunuchs in the palace at any one time. From a high of around 70,000, the number of eunuchs in the Forbidden City dropped as time went on. When Puyi, the last emperor, was overthrown in 1912, he had around 1,500 eunuchs on his staff. Although the palace was swarming with eunuchs, the emperor must have had a lonely job. The emperor had a role of breathtaking complexity. He was the moral leader of the nation, statesman, legislator, supreme judge, administrator, commander of the army, patron of art, and chief examiner. He sat at the apex of a huge bureaucracy. Although thousands of mandarins reported to him, he had the final say. The government worked on the relentless flow of written documents. Literacy was the key to a job in the government. China was the world's first meritocracy. Government officials were selected by their examination scores. Exams for the top offices were held every 3 years. This is the list of successful candidates. Chinese government was based on literacy. Such was the Chinese reverence of the written word, that good handwriting was the main criteria for government office. To become a government officer, a mandarin, one had to score highly on the tests. The exams were given in stages around the country. Every third year, the top candidates from the regional exams came to the Forbidden City for one final test. The examiner was the emperor himself. The highest scoring candidates were given jobs in the government. One candidate recalled his feelings as he waited to hear the exam results.
"It was a little cold that day. Just before dawn, I knelt with the other candidates on the ground in front of the Hall of Supreme Harmony to wait for the results.
The day before, there had been a lot of gossip about who did best, and I would lost all hope. When the results were read out, I heard that the top candidate was none other than me. Whenever my name was called, a fanfare was played. I couldn't believe my ears, and I didn't dare to step forward. But in the end, a protocol officer dragged me out of the line. The emperor gave me a prize, and I was carried out of the palace through the emperor's own gate.
In the bureaucratic and status-conscious imperial court, everything was given a hierarchical rank. Grades of mandarins, ranks of concubines, even buildings were ranked. It's easy to tell the rank of a building. The more mythological creatures that are on the roof's eaves, the higher its status. In front of the mythological creatures is a man riding a chicken. He's a reminder of a tyrannical ruler who was hanged from the eaves of his palace. Then come a row of up to 9 mythological beasts. In the 18th century, the many ranks of mandarins sorely taxed the patience of one great emperor. As a hands-on emperor, he found the bureaucracy cumbersome. Straining under the weight of the bureaucracy, he dreamed of centralizing even more power in his own hands. The couplet he penned, expressing his longing for more power, still hangs on the wall of his home. He may have even put his words into action. Some claim that he had practiced what he preached by using a secret passage that allowed him to bypass the bureaucrats. The mysterious long gap between the palace and the government office is rumored to be a private passage, his personal shortcut direct to his government ministers. Now sealed up, the passage has yet to reveal all its secrets. The Chinese New Year is the most joyous time of year. Families come together to celebrate and wish each other good fortune. As this ancient painting shows, New Year's joy spread to the Forbidden City as well. The Forbidden City was more than just the seat of government. It was also the home of the emperor and his family. Hidden deep within the Forbidden City, the inner court was the most private part of the palace complex. It was the domestic heart of the empire. And even though he was the son of heaven, the emperor had a family life just like anyone else. It is true that the emperor had many wives, but so too did any man who had money. In imperial China, polygamy was the preferred status. Nuclear families were for the poor, not the rich. The inner court is located in the northern third of the Forbidden City. It is the woman's realm, the female part, the private part of the palace. Its densely packed courtyards are separated from the wide spaces and great halls of the public part, the male part, by a wall. No man could enter the woman's realm of the inner court without the emperor's permission, except, of course, the eunuchs. The architecture of the inner court is less grand, more human, more domestic than that of the outer court. The principles of yin-yang underlie its layout. There are 12 residential palaces for the emperor's women, 6 on each side of the palace's central axis. Between the 6 east and the 6 west palaces lie the most important buildings in the inner court. Called the 3 rear palaces, they mirror the 3 great halls of the outer court. The largest of the rear palaces is the emperor's residence. The second largest is the residence of the empress. One of the most notorious residents of the Forbidden City was the Empress Dowager Cixi, a close contemporary of Britain's Queen Victoria. Between 1861 and 1908, she virtually ruled China. Cixi was a middle-ranking concubine who had the fortune to bear the emperor his only son. But her good fortune was a tragedy for China. She exercised power for almost 50 years. First as a favorite concubine, and then when her husband, the emperor, died, by controlling her young son and nephew when they ascended the throne. On her 50th birthday, Cixi, the Empress Dowager, spent 6 million silver taels, that's more than $80 million in today's money, redecorating her palace. Her daily routine was extravagant. Each morning, her female attendants kowtowed and proclaimed, "May luck be with you, venerable ancestor." Then they would make the bed and bring a silver basin of hot water to her. Cixi wrapped her hands in hot towels and soaked them in the hot water for so long that it had to be replenished several times. The routine eased the joints in her hands. After that, her face would be washed, but not in the usual way. A hot towel was put on her face to reduce her wrinkles. A eunuch was called to brush her hair, paint her eyebrows, powder her face, and rouge her cheeks. Then, Cixi would smoke 2 pipes of dipping snuff and drink a cup of milk tea. The Empress Dowager was partial to drinking human milk and cow's milk. She thought them a tonic for youth. Cixi was rigid and demanding outside her boudoir as she was within. The manipulative former concubine ruled the court with an iron will. It had been 1,000 years since a woman last sat on the dragon throne. But that did not stop Cixi. She devised an extraordinary arrangement of a throne behind the throne, the one separated from the other by a thin curtain. While her son sat on the throne in front of the curtain, she sat on her own throne behind him, firmly gripping the reins of state. Cixi was the power behind the throne. Yet, in 1908, she made a deathbed decision that put a child on the throne and brought down an empire. There were many women in an emperor's life. In addition to an empress, he also had consorts and concubines. This was because the emperor's most important official duty was to produce a son and heir. He had to move heaven and earth to produce another son of heaven. Rather than place all his eggs in one basket, most emperors had several wives. Some had many. The 17th century Emperor Kangxi was contemporary with William Penn, the father of Pennsylvania, and with the Sun King, Louis XIV of France. Kangxi ruled China for 60 years, with 38 official wives, plus another 17 unofficial ones. The relatively self-denying Guangxu Emperor only had 1 empress and 2 concubines. But then again, he died young, so may not have reached his full complement. The emperor ruled the country, but not his marital life. His preferred woman wouldn't necessarily become his empress. Wives and concubines were often selected politically, not passionately. There were a lot to choose from. Girls between 13 and 17 would be presented to the court for selection.